Evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us again on one of our Safer at Home series. Very nice to have you. Doesn't feel like November out there, but it is November. We're just a couple of weeks away from Thanksgiving. If this is your first time joining us, very glad to have you. We would love to have you as a member. If you're interested, you can just go to our website, museumsonthegreen.org. One of the things that we do for this is if you've got a question, we wait till the end, use the chat feature on the bottom and just type up your question. If you would make sure that you mute yourself so that we can just hear our presenters, that would be great. This is sponsored by Cape Cod 5, First Citizens Federal Credit Union, and Martha's Vineyard Savings. And every book that we have is also offered at Eight Cousins Bookseller. And in this particular case, the Museums on the Green gift shop also has a copy of Karen and Kevin's book, In the Wake of the Mayflower. So there's a couple places for you to get this. Tonight's talk is actually a pretty easy one for me because these are people I don't really need to introduce. Everybody seems to know them. Karen obviously is a local artist. Kevin is a local historian and history lover. They are collaborators on this book. They are longtime friends. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the artist who did the first painting that has every known member of the first Thanksgiving for her painting, the first Thanksgiving 1621, which, by the way, is at the Museums on the Green and will be there until February of 2022, which, given how 2020 has gone for everyone, I'm really glad we have it for another year. So without further ado, would you welcome Karen Rinaldo and Kevin Doyle?
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And I'd like to thank Museums on the Green, in addition to Mark Schmidt. And I'd also like to thank my partner, Kevin Doyle. Kevin's work ethic is second to none, and whatever I throw at him, he's able to throw right back to me. So it's a great working relationship, and it was a pleasure working on this book.
It was.
So in talking about the book, we have to bring you back first to the inspiration behind the book, which took place in 1994 with the commissioning of the painting of the first Thanksgiving. So this was commissioned by the NACCC, the National Association of Congregational Christian Churches, and they're based out in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. And the painting was a commission that came to me very much a surprise, but they were aware of work that I had done in the past with historical subjects, and so they were very confident that I would take on this commission. I was not as confident. I was a little more reluctant because I knew what was involved in something like this. I knew it was an important piece, but at that moment, I had no idea the magnitude of it and the impression it would take on and how it would then even affect the nation. So this was something that had a time element attached to it as well, and it had to be completed for their anniversary celebration, the NACCC. And so I had to start in right away on the research behind the painting. So the research took, between the research and the physical work, nearly 9 months, but I'll drop it back to say 7 months. And so I worked with Plimoth Plantation and Pilgrim Hall and various historians, some Wampanoags, in getting a sense of, could this actually be created?
And if I may interrupt here, the NACCC, the National Association of Congregational Christian Churches, they call themselves the Pilgrims Church because that's clearly the lineage that they have. And it's worthy of note that the last commission that they gave somebody was a silversmith in Holland, And they asked him 100 years ago in 1891 to strike a bronze plaque that's probably 2 feet by 3 feet that's on the side of Peterskirk, the St. Peter's Church in Leiden, that commemorates Reverend Robinson, who was the senior pastor, if you will, the spiritual advisor to the congregation that left from England and went to Holland, 300 strong. And 100 years later, they asked Karen to do this to commemorate the first Thanksgiving of the Pilgrims in 1995, so about 100 years apart. So
yeah,
this was a gift to the nation as well.
Yeah, it's amazing linkage to have there. So I set out on this exploration for information, and I asked the point blank question to the director of Plymouth Plantation: do you think it's possible to create this historically accurate piece? And his advice was that if you take it on a little portion at a time, almost like a puzzle piece at a time, he felt that it would be possible. That was really what I needed to hear. And I continued to do the research. And what had to happen in order to get to the painting stage was a tracing drawing, the same size as the original, 3 feet by 5 feet. And then it was signed off by the historians. They said it was historically accurate. The painting was completed in the timeline, and it was unveiled at Pilgrim Hall, the Museum of the Pilgrims, in 1995.
That's not a bad banner to have out in front of your house, is it? I tell Karen she ought to use that as a bedspread.
Now, I don't have the banner, but again, it was a surprise to see it. And after it was on display there at Pilgrim Hall, it was at Plymouth Plantation for 20 years. So now we fast forward, and we have the 400th commemoration of the landing of the Mayflower. And I'm looking at all this information that we have within the painting. I'm also looking at work that was done back in 1976 with the bicentennial. And at some point I say to Kevin, you know, it looks like we have material here for a book. What do you think? And we carried on this long distance communication, and before we knew it, we were looking at the makings of a very fine book. This shot is the interior of a temporary housing. So Mark Schmidt has this great vision, and he decides he's going to put in a request to see if he can get the painting displayed here on the grounds of the Historical Society on our campus here. And he does. He gets permission. They send the painting via truck delivery. And because he only had a temporary housing for it in the Conant House, he realizes it needs a better presence. And this rear section of the Wicks House now has been devoted to a very nice display room. This is the interior. It was created during the winter. It was completed about July this past summer. And of course, in March, the COVID virus hit, and no one was able to go into the room to see the painting. Now, I don't own the painting. It's owned by the NACCC, but fortunately, one of the board members highly recommended that I maintain the copyright on the painting. And having done that, allowed organizations and book publications like Scholastic Book to contact me and get permission to use the painting in their Teaching American History with Art Masterpieces, along with 4 other very well-known paintings.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. When you look at those other 4 photos, you recognize those right off the bat from the Civil War or Washington crossing the Delaware. And there's the first Thanksgiving right in there.
And so within the book, it had some interactive programs that students geared 4th grade through the 8th grade would be able to be introduced to the subject. So it was a great teaching aid. And, you know, this piece from moment one, when it was created and then released, took on a life of its own. It really did. And this was something that I didn't even know had come out. This took place through Plimoth Plantation in 2007, as it was on display there, through the National Museum of the American Indian. There was a story placed at the Thanksgiving table that ran within the magazine. And the next slide, this excerpt from that. So Plimoth Plantation exhibit features the first Thanksgiving painting, commissioned 1994, to give an accurate picture of the native presence. And that was that it portrayed the 90 Wampanoag guests, 91 including Massasoit, and the 52 English colonists. And they again say that it was portrayed in a historically accurate fashion.
They're not working. Oh. Picking up the story that we tell here, you see the harbor scene from Amsterdam in 1600. It's kind of important, well, it's very important to note that when the Pilgrims left from England, Westminster Abbey was already 400 years old. So they were very familiar with fine architecture, furniture, silverware, those sorts of things. And this would have been Amsterdam in the 1600s. So what are they doing in Amsterdam in 1600? Well, they were unhappy with the situation as it appeared, as it was going on in England at the time. We'll talk about that in just a second. They were used to going on pilgrimages. And this is a segment of the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. There you see Geoffrey Chaucer in 1387, so 200 years before all this is happening. Wander April with the Shooter Sota, then longing folk to go on pilgrimages. So in springtime, Easter time, Englishmen went on pilgrimages as well.
It was the men primarily that would go on these trips.
It was the men that would be there, and especially from every shearer's end of England to Canterbury they went. So they'd go to visit the Archbishop of Canterbury. That was where their pilgrimage would take them. Next one. And again, in the William Bradford statute, you see the fourth line down there. They knew they were pilgrims. Some people talk about, where did the word pilgrim come from? It was in discourse. It was regularly used. And they became separatists.
Well, there was one other thing I wanted to add here.
Go ahead.
So this really, the word pilgrim is given to them by Bradford, but at this point too, as they're getting ready to leave the country, it's Reverend Robinson, who is making the comment that they're leaving behind families, they're leaving behind a way of life. And it's a rather tearful departure for a lot of these people because they'll never see these people, their friends and people who they knew again. So, and he also hands off a very inspiring note to the people, to the pilgrims. And now you can pick up with the crossing.
So as they leave, now they were separatists. We know they were separatists. What did they separate from? They separated from the Church of England. In about the 1530s, King Henry VIII was married to Catherine of Aragon for decades, but he had no heir. So he went to the Pope and he said, I need a new wife. We need to do something here. I need to have an heir to the throne. Pope said, nope, I'm not going to do it. King Henry VIII said, fine, then I'll make my own religion. He became the king of the Church of England. After 70 years or so, there became disappointment within the church, and people started to separate from it for purist reasons. They thought that the liturgy should be based on the Bible and very pure rendition of the Bible. So that's when they started to separate. This wasn't the only group that did that. There were splinter groups all over England, but they would be persecuted for their faith. And so they started this pilgrimage. Instead of going to Canterbury, they went to Holland. first to Amsterdam for 2 years from 1607 to 1609. And then the next 10 years, they were down in Leiden, 40 miles south of Amsterdam. Amsterdam was kind of an industrial city, but Leiden was more pastoral. It was a center of education, of learning.
And I think they were concerned that the children were losing their true identity.
Yeah, think of that after 10 years. If you had a 10-year-old and they had never been there, never been to England, they didn't understand what England was all about.
But this also, and so these drawings appear in the book. This to me is like the most desperate image right here. And I think they're propelled by the inspirational words of Robinson. But this really says, you know, where are they going? What are they going to encounter? Do they have any idea of what the future holds? What is propelling them?
So they set sail and they're at sea for 66 days. Within 3 days they're aiming, by the way, for the mouth of the Hudson River. They hope to go around New York City. And as they approached to Cape Cod, we're having a lot of trouble here with the
yeah, we're not advancing on our slides. Here we go.
And as they were approaching, if we can go back just to one, as they were approaching to Cape Cod, they got blown 3 days out from where they wanted to be. They got blown north by a storm, an Atlantic storm. So they decided, okay, what we have to do is follow the Cape down south, go round around Chatham, and then go in. But as we all know, you don't round around Chatham, you go around Chatham if you're not careful. So the captain had enough brains to say, okay, let's turn around and go back up and rest up in Provincetown. And so that's why they spent on November 11th, they land in Provincetown. And that's where they spend their first couple of weeks. They come over, of course, on the Mayflower. That's what the Mayflower looked like. When Karen says it's an act of desperation, think of yourself just saying, well, I don't think I'll take the Holland America cruise. I think I'll take the Mayflower instead.
Well, it's cramped, it's cold, it's just a terrible cruise that they're on, a journey that they're on.
So how did they know where they were? They knew because Bartholomew Gosnold had already been here. He came over in 1602. Many people on the Cape know that. He mapped the entire shore, and in fact, out in Cuttyhunk, they built a monument to him. And he's the one who gave the name to Martha's Vineyard, the Elizabeth Islands. He named Cape Cod. He actually named a little promontory called Plymouth when he was going by as well.
And here we're showing the points of land where the Pilgrims have traveled. And we're going to get back to this slide in a moment, but we're going to move on to the next, which shows the first landing place of the Pilgrims. And this comes out of a map from Mort's Relation, where they first touched down on American soil. And you're going to get to the compact.
Yeah, we just out there today. We're all revved up because we just came back from Provincetown. We spent the afternoon there, right under the shadow of the monument. It was there that they wrote the Mayflower Compact, and they did it before they even set foot on shore. Here they were 66 days at sea, and you can just imagine, they left from Leiden with 100 pilgrims on board. They needed to stop in England on the way over. And when that happened, there were some people who said they were going to come to America, said, no, I don't think I want to do that. I think I'll stay here. But the Mayflower required a certain number of people, so they filled it up with others as well. They clearly had, Miles Standish was a military force, not a religious force. And then they also filled the crew out with, well, you had the sailing crew, and then you had strangers, they were called. They might have been profiteers, adventurers, certainly. So they get to the mainland after 2 months of sailing, And before they can leave the ship, they said, we have to have rules. We have to do something. And they draw up the Mayflower Compact, which is, we recommend, we really memorialize the Mayflower Compact. We see it there in the Founders Monument. This is also in the monument that's right below Pilgrim Monument in relief. So what does it say? Basically, a couple of those words, if you can read them there, the key part of it right here is that we combine ourselves together into a civil body politic, one body politic, for our better ordering and preservation, to enact such just and equal laws as shall be for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission.
I would stay on that slide for a minute. Only I wanted to make this comment about, and I call it the soliloquy that Bradford goes into when they're in Provincetown, and he looks around at the crew and the people, and he says they're just weather beaten, they're worn down, they're starving, they're just in total disarray. And it's what is propelling them to move forward, and he feels that it is their faith.
What it comes down to is the key things that I think it becomes the bedrock of our, the reason for our Revolutionary War. It certainly is the basis of our Constitution. The concept of majority rule, democratic governance. When they got there, they realized they were totally independent. There was no king, there was no government, there was no anybody. And they had to be totally self-sufficient. They knew they didn't want a monarchy. That's one of the things they were leaving, but you couldn't tolerate anarchy either. And we think that this is really the basis of the spirit of America.
So we rely heavily here on Mort's relation, and we do, and we've discussed this. It's the immediacy, I think, of the way the entries are made between Winslow's writings, Bradford's writings, and there are several occasions where we say that, a journal is a pretty important part of one's life. It's recording things that are important to their lives. And so one of the first places that they are traveling, once they've taken from the Mayflower, they go over to what is called Pilgrim Spring. And this is where they have their first sip of fresh spring water.
And you might see the words again there, by the first civil body
politic. Yes. So they've traversed through valleys and hillsides of deep grasses and rough brush, and they make their way to this point, and they're again in a kind of a desperate state. They're hungry, they're thirsty, they find this spring, and this is the area that they say is this monument, a rock marking the place. And this is a true. And the second expedition that they make, this is about 16 of them, headed by Bradford and Standish. Standish is Cornhill in the distant shot. This is the landscape going to Cornhill. At the base of this area, there's a rock, and it has the names of those who were joining in this expedition. And it's here where they have taken corn. They've kind of rummaged through some of the graves, and they say here, we've digged up a great kettle full of very fair corn. If we could find any of the people, we would give them the kettle again and satisfy them for their corn, which place we call Cornhill. And they were always giving God thanks for whatever he bestows on them. And sure, it was God's good providence that we found this corn, for else knows what we would have gone through. So soon as we can meet conveniently with them, we will give them full satisfaction.
Again, sometimes you'll hear a narrative that says they stole corn or whatever, and we think that that's a little harsh on the Pilgrims. It is in contemporaneous writing, they're saying we'll make fair,
And they do.
fair recompense. And come July, when they run into Chief Aspinet of the Nauset tribe, they certainly do.
But again, it's a desperateness, it's a time element. They're running out of time. They need to get back to the boat. They can't be looking around for who it is, whatever it is that they have taken, who it belongs to. And yeah, so it's a case of they stole it, they took it, they gave it back. This slide really was the inspiration for a lot of work that took place up in Eastham with the 400th Committee. And it's a view across the marsh, and in the distance, you would be looking at the First Encounter Beach. That then becomes the third expedition.
And on that spot, they have this tablet. It's impossible for you to read. I recognize that. This plaque was put there in 1920, so it was for the 300th anniversary, and it talks about the first encounter on December 8th. There's not since been added a second plaque, which is this one, which is talks about the first encounter, but the language up the top says, near this site, the Nauset tribe of the Wampanoag Nation, seeking to protect themselves and their culture, had their first encounter on December 8th, 1620, and it was the same 16 players from the Mayflower. We think that that's really kind of an important element that they recognized they were out to save their culture. And as Edward Winslow says, as he walks away, after we had given God thanks, we took our shallop and went on our journey and called this place the First Encounter.
And it's the only place where we see the reference to the first encounter.
That's the name. And we think it was, again, sort of divine inspiration that they called it the First Encounter. They didn't say it with any negative context. You've just had a battle. You've had about probably a 15, 20-minute battle. Now, when you think about it, these are Indians. These are the natives who could kill a rabbit with a bow and arrow. So they certainly knew how to use their weapons. They were Englishmen who had a blunderbuss. All you got to do is shoot it, and you're going to hit somebody. And yet, as they broke the contact, 15, 20 minutes later, the Indians ran into the woods. The landing party got back in the shallop and left and continued their exploration, simply called the place a very neutral term, the First Encounter. When we think back to that plaque that talks about saving your culture, that's what we think happens here. The language of the battle and everything else is very neutral, and as we know, especially here on Cape Cod, the Wampanoags continue to enjoy recognition as a tribe, very friendly and very strong relationships with the Pilgrims.
Now, and the shallop is the center focus of the Eastham 1620-2020 commemorative piece. And this was done for the town of Eastham. And it has a lot of the landmarks in Eastham, one being the Indian Rock that you see on the left-hand side, fourth image down. But the shallop was an interesting vessel. It was used to traverse the little coves and inlet waterways. That painting was inspired going back to the bicentennial for what was done for the 15 Cape Cod towns. And you see those at the back of the book, which becomes kind of a travelogue in the book. So this was Falmouth, and we highlight Falmouth as a comparative.
The shallop itself was built from specifications as best they could render them from texts and so forth by Mystic Seaport in the 1950s, so 50, 60 years ago. And it's obviously in a pretty sad state of decay as you look at it right there. They brought it up to the Lowell's Boat Shop up on the Merrimack River in Amesbury, which is the oldest continuously operating boat shop in America from 1790, I think it was. That shallop became the centerpiece, and we had we know that Jim Russo is on with us right now. He's the head of the Chamber of Commerce out in Eastham, and he's the senior member of the
400th committee.
400th committee in recognizing what the role that Eastham played. And you can see that the shallop that Karen designed is right there in the
Yeah,
seal.
and the shallop, again, I go back to it being an interesting vessel, but it came, I call it like the first prefab construction, because it came in two parts. It was stored on the Mayflower, and it did serve as a sleeping quarters. It was above the gun deck, I believe. And so because it was such a crammed, crowded boat, the Mayflower, people, they would actually kind of hover in there and have a little extra room. No privacy, but a little extra room.
In the book, there's a page where we call it the inevitable encounter. And as you look down there, you probably can't read it, but we think it kind of sums up our thought about the book and everything in general. You know, in the top is, it's a new world, it's home ownership, cultivate the land, advancement of Christianity, honor the king, laws, ordinances, constitutions, Englishmen. We'll call it New England. At the same time, it was an ancient land, it's tribal territory, hunting grounds, the Great Spirit, summer camp, winter camp, sachems, braves, corn, squash, beans, wildfowl. We call it Nauset. So then a clash of cultures was inevitable. But how the clash would be resolved would determine the success of this attempt of the English to colonize a land called America. There had been other, we know in 1592, it's the lost colony in North Carolina. In 1607, I know Jamestown is very proud of their history, but hopefully nobody from Jamestown is on this call right now, because it was almost wiped out. They did not get along with the natives. The natives had no use for them. Just as the natives had no use for the colony that was up in Albemarle Sound either. This time it was different, and we think that, you know, again, the language of considering it the encounter is all a part of it. Plymouth Rock, you know, what's really kind of interesting, the mausoleum, you've all been there. We got people from all over the country, so perhaps that's an ambitious statement. When you get here, folks who travel, we get a big kick out of it because people come down. That rock is no bigger than a Volkswagen. In fact, that's probably generous. Mark Schmidt lives there, he can tell you. But that monument, the surrounding, was built in 1920. Again, that was a 300th gift to the town and gift to the nation, really, as a piece part of the 400th celebration. Everything goes back to this treaty. And again, I apologize for the writing. It is in the book, and you can read it there. But it was a treaty made on March 22nd. Now think about that. They came to Plymouth they were there about December 15th is when they all sailed back from Provincetown back over to Plymouth. So that's in December. It wasn't until March 22nd, 4 months later, that Chief Massasoit shows up and talks to them. Now, the Wampanoags knew for 4 months that they were there. They watched them build their houses. They watched them do everything. As you look at Karen's painting, it's as if she had a Kodak camera right then and there and took the picture. That's as accurate as can be. And we'll talk a little bit more about the painting again. But there they are. They built that whole town before Massasoit shows up. And on the day that he shows up, he and Governor Bradford sit down and they write this treaty that lasted for 50 years, that neither he nor any of his should injure or do any hurt to any of our people, and if any do hurt to ours, he should send the offender that we might punish him. And that's what it is. It's the golden rule throughout. He should send to his neighbor Confederates to certify them of this, that they might not wrong us, but might be likewise compromised in the conditions of peace. So it was a mutual treaty as well, because the Wampanoag tribe had been decimated by disease, the great pandemic, a word that we all recognize.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that goes to the point, they knew they needed each other. They were looking for the protection from the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims knew they needed the natives. So it was a harmonious agreement in that regard.
Yeah, it was the Narragansett tribe that was their major concern, and they were right across Narragansett Bay. So fast forward now from that point of that treaty to the
Yes, so now we're going to the 3-day harvest feast. And here out of Mort's relation, we have our harvest being gotten in. Our governor sent 4 men on fowling so that we might, after a special manner, rejoice together. Many of the Indians coming among us, and amongst the rest, the greatest king, Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted.
And we think that that is the first Thanksgiving. You know, some people want to say, no, the first Thanksgiving wasn't until FDR decreed it was, or whoever the president was that established the concept. But in fact, a 3-day feast where you have the congregation of the Pilgrims and the natives, that strikes me as a reason to celebrate Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And I'm cautious too about the word celebrate, but it was, I think they were in a state of giving thanks for getting through a terrible first year. By all accounts, none of them should ever have survived. I mean, this was brutal. And so in constructing the painting, and because we have the 90 Braves, it was an important part of this composition to really show the tension and the anticipation. This was not by invitation that the natives were all here at this gathering. It was more like they knew that something was going on here. They knew that there was a rejoicing going on. And they were also there in a defense posture. They were there to protect. There were no native women invited here. Again, it was under protection of a sort. And so the way they're positioned clearly shows that hesitation. We're going to be looking to see just what's taking place. And move on.
And there are those who say that they were there to protect Massasoit. And if that's the case, then certainly they had the capability to do that. With one nod of the head, Massasoit could have easily wiped out this colony just the same way as they did in North Carolina, and it almost did in Jamestown.
So one of the additional pieces, there are prints that are available of the painting, and one of the pieces that accompanies the print is a legend. It identifies all of the key people at this feast. One of the people from Plymouth Plantation at the time who I dealt with, and he was very helpful. His name was Tony Pollard, but he went by the name Nanapeshet. And he was the indigenous expert there at Plymouth Plantation. It was actually, he lived in Mashpee. At the time that the painting was unveiled at Pilgrim Hall, he was in a coma. So he knew about the completion of the painting. He had helped me with the way the natives would have been positioned, the clothing they would have been wearing. And he died several days later. But he was very helpful in the research work that was done to create that impression and the accuracy of the piece. And here we're highlighting, there was a child that was born on the voyage over to the New World, and that was Oceanus. And then we also had Peregrine, who was born in Provincetown in the harbor.
And that's Oceanus sitting on Priscilla's lap, and Peregrine White is in the cradle. And my wife is sitting right at the other end of the room right over here. So I should point out that the kid right there in the gray, right there in the middle, is Peregrine's older brother, Resolved White. And that's the family. Now, William White, the father, died very shortly after landing. So his wife remarried and became Mrs. Winslow, subsequently. But Peregrine White goes on in great historical records as the first English child born in America.
And the cradle actually is at Pilgrim Hall, and so that was something that I was able to weave into the composition. And so here we have the head table. I won't get into every figure, but we have Bradford at the head of the table, and Winslow is standing next to him. But we have Squanto, Massasoit, and Harbor and the relationships there are very interesting. The one, Squanto, who was extremely helpful to the Pilgrims, but had this little feud going with Massasoit. I have them positioned in trying to take into consideration the feelings that they had towards one another. But there was a lot of respect between Harbor and Miles Standish. And I think they had a respect for one another, but they also had kind of a jockeying of wanting to take the position of I know Squanto did with Massasoit to become the sachem.
You know,
I wanted to just point out, again, going back to when something takes on a life of its own.
okay,
You know,
go ahead.
and you never know who will contact you or where these contacts come from. So this past year, Philadelphia Cream Cheese gets in touch with me, and they said that they wanted to do a promotional for their company. And they had spotted 2 women carrying pies, and you can just barely make them out there.
Corner.
And so they turned the pies into cheesecake, and they said in the full page came out into the Boston Globe how thankful they were, and they made them into the Cheesecake Society instead of the Mayflower Society. It was all in good fun. It was a well done spoof, but it was pretty interesting.
That is. I wanted to go back to the head table when Karen was talking. Everybody knows Karen is an artist, but in fact, she's a visual historian, and she has several pieces that record that as you look at it. And this is perhaps the best visual history that you're going to find of the first Thanksgiving, of this gathering, to show the amity that existed between the natives and the pilgrims, the Englishmen who came there. And as Karen described, the posture involved in everything tells a story. There's a reason for all of this, and it's really fascinating to think about the history that is being portrayed.
In the book, and I wanted to point this out because I'm very proud to be able to have this included in the book, and I was surprised at the immediate reaction that we got from Dr. Jeremy Bangs, who was working at that time at Plymouth Plantation and Pilgrim Hall, and has been director of the American Pilgrim Museum in Leiden for quite some time. But this was an excerpt. This was part of a letter that he had sent, and he references the Packanacket Indians, and he says, "Your attempt to emphasize the presence of Packanacket Indians in your painting of 1621 Thanksgiving is admirable and has attracted attention since the painting was first displayed at Pilgrim Hall. I've noticed its continuing exhibition here and there and frequent use in online publications. So it's nice to learn that it's again on display." And that was a very rewarding comment to have and to be able to include it in the book.
Many of you on this call are scholars, we know that. And you're probably familiar with Dr. Jeremy Bangs, who has almost single-handedly built the American Museum of the Pilgrim in Leiden, internationally recognized as a preeminent scholar on all things pilgrim.
Yeah, and prolific as a writer.
And prolific as a writer, and he responded immediately to Karen's painting.
So here we have, again, we're highlighting the fact that we showed like the first street that was created. It's a very communal atmosphere. In 2 years after the first Thanksgiving, I find this is interesting political wise. Bradford, whether consciously or unconsciously, he introduces capitalism to the Pilgrims by expanding from their home ownership the land. And by doing that, he turns what was a very sluggish kind of working condition into much more of a spirited and hands-on experience for the Pilgrims, even to the point where the children would be out in the fields retrieving crops. But we show fenced-in areas with animals, and the natives never would have seen that. I also include, and I'll let Kevin talk a little bit about this too, but I do include the rock. And you say it's a historically accurate painting, but the rock is a thing of myth. And yet the reasoning behind the rock, and it was agreed that it was a legitimate to include it, was that it really represents the fortitude, the determination of the Pilgrims. And so it justifiably stands as part of the background there. We also show the shallop. You can see it in the mouth of the river.
Yeah, as you look at this, and again, going back to the concept of a visual history, what you're looking at is the very first street that was ever built in America. Nobody had ever seen houses lined up as they are. And of course, the Pilgrims hadn't seen them either. They were used to living in brick and stone homes in Scrooby before they left.
It was something totally unfamiliar to them.
Totally unfamiliar to the Pilgrims, totally unfamiliar to the natives, who had never seen a structure so permanent. They never would have built perpendicular to the water. You would have seen a string of teepees as part of their summer camp stretched alongside the bay there in Plymouth. So there you have permanent structures. You see in the distance, in the middle ground there in the background, you see the beginning of walled-in agriculture. You can just see between those first two houses, you can see the line there that indicates a stone wall, to what Karen was just saying. Now the land was becoming owned. And this was a totally foreign concept to the natives. Can you imagine fences and walls, and then animals being fenced in? No such a thing. For all the years, the hundreds of years that the natives had been resident on the land, this is all precipitous, obviously, to King Philip's War. But in 1675, because ultimately the land starts being fenced, the ponds start being saying, this is my pond, this isn't your pond. And not only is it us, it's one thing when 50 pilgrims, 100 land, and within months it's down to 50, and half of them are women or children. But now it's a whole different ballgame for them. Now that you have people landing in Boston in 1630, the Massachusetts Bay Colony is set up, and there's encroachment all around. The key to King Philip's War to understand is if you were to put your hand out, and your wrist is really in Boston or Massachusetts Bay, your fingertips are now the frontier. Deerfield and Swansea and different areas around Buzzards Bay and Narragansett Bay, excuse me. But basically, King Philip's War was aimed at your fingernails, and the object was to drive you back from the frontier and force you back into the water, which is basically what happened at Jamestown. It didn't happen that way, obviously. But the point is, in Cape Cod, not one of the currently 15 towns of Cape Cod was attacked during King Philip's War. And I think it all goes back to the treaty. Massasoit's son was Metacomet, who became King Philip. He took his Christian name and an English title rather than call himself Chief Metacom. He became King Philip. And the protagonist was Edward Winslow's son, again, the son of one of the original Pilgrims. But 40 years later, they had died. Massasoit was gone, Bradford was gone. Winslow was gone, and now all this encroachment was starting to catch up with the into the Indian way of life.
And, you know, they say a picture paints 1,000 words, and I guess that's what we're saying, that there's 1,000 words attached to this image. And we're coming up on the end of our presentation. But there are those, I think, who would say that these people, the Pilgrims, were a complicated people, that maybe they were even a contradictive at many times. But these were not the best of times. These were harsh conditions, not only for the Pilgrims, but the natives had their share of horrific events. And if the painting presents a certain light into these times, I think it would be that they were all striving for one thing, and that was to have some kind of meaning attached to their lives and to be able to cooperate and live in some peace. It was an experiment, and maybe we're still living that experiment today. And in the wake of the Mayflower, as Mark said early on, it's available at 8 Cousins. We hope you have an opportunity to read it. I'd again like to thank those who have signed on tonight. I know that there are many Mayflower descendants, and we're thrilled to have you on. We welcome you, and we hope you have some questions, some comments, and maybe we can do some future work with you. So thank you. I didn't see the names come up, but I know you were in touch with me. So hopefully we'll get to have further conversation. And thank you, Mark Schmidt, for all your generosity and what you're doing here at the Historical Society. An opportunity to see this painting here for those who come to town and those who live here. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Kevin. That was great. And yes, as you mentioned earlier, yes, as everyone knows, I live in Plymouth. As you were showing that picture of Plymouth Rock from the 300th celebration, here's a little trivia fact that Plymouth residents know. There's actually a larger piece of Plymouth Rock in the Smithsonian than there actually is in the portico in Plymouth. So that gives you a sense of the size or lack thereof. You just haven't lived until you've gone been in Plymouth on Thanksgiving and seeing people having driven 1,412 miles to see the Rock, and with the look of sheer excitement on their face. Note sarcasm. If you got any questions, please use the chat feature. Karen, what would you, when you talked to, you've told me about the amount of time, and I think you've told people about the amount of time that you took before you even started sketching it and researching it. What was the most interesting, illuminating fact that you found out about the whole Plymouth colony before you even ever started putting ink to paper? What was something that just jumped off the page to you?
You know, it was the whole experience, and I was limited to 4th grade elementary school knowledge, which was minimal, and so it was a daunting presentation when I heard that, you know, I needed to have this be historically accurate, and just thinking of per square inch, how could you even fit all of those people into this given space? But I was intrigued with, because I felt I came to know each pilgrim and each native, even though we don't have the names of the natives, but there's a real connection that you feel, and a great sympathy that you feel, and an empathy, an empathetic feeling towards what they were going through, what they were doing. So in trying to create the image, I first submerged myself in those feelings, and I described it like being an archaeologist on a dig, or a forensic scientist, or person who makes these composites by just, you know, a hair at a time, a word at a time. There were very few images that existed. I think Winslow was the only one who had a portrait painted. So you're going by descriptions of these people to mold the subject. You're going by an attitude that's projected about a person, and all of these things go into the composition and the makeup of each individual. And so that was the most fascinating part, it was the most challenging part. And then it was just putting the puzzle together.
You know, I might add, Mark, I know you probably have questions there, but when Karen talks about a painting taking on a life of its own, we probably on this phone call right now have at least one representative from the Mayflower chapter in Houston, another one from Oregon. We think we probably have somebody on from Leiden, actually,
Yeah.
and associated. And that's the life that this painting has taken on, especially in 1621. The Mayflower Society is looking at it as from arrival to survival. And that really is the magic of the Plymouth Plantation in our estimation. Again, it was the first encounter. And the first encounter really lasted for almost 50 years of amity, of mutual support between the Wampanoag tribe, the greater Wampanoag tribe, and the Pilgrim experiment.
This subject could really be a lifelong thesis. Yeah, no, it's just a comment that
Yeah.
it could be a forever subject because it's so rich, it's so full of information, and it's an ongoing subject. We continue to learn, and it's a great conversational piece.
And it was fortuitous too. I mean, you know, we're almost literally on the 400th anniversary of the first landing, almost literally to the day. You know that
400th
2
anniversary
days off.
of the first Thanksgiving
Yeah.
is 2021.
questions are coming in. Is there anything in the painting that since the passing of time you have thought might need changing?
That's a great question. Because, you know, I mentioned that to Kevin, you know, we talk daily, and one thing, I would never want to do this over again. So take very good care of it here at Museums of the Green. You know, I put so much thought and careful consideration to every move I make. And like a Rubik's Cube, you can only go so many directions, so many ways, so many times. When that final effort is made in the computerizing that you go through in your mind, there actually is no other way of representing it. Now, could it be taken to another level of historical accuracy? Perhaps, in maybe a whole different subject layout. But this one, the way it is, there's nothing I would change. That's not out of ego. That's not out of any other feeling towards it. It's what I experienced having gone through it in the creating of it.
Okay. Question here. What do you think was the reason that no female Native Americans were present at the dinner? Is it just for protection?
Of the natives?
Yeah, there were just braves. There were no
that
females.
Would be exactly the reason, yeah.
You know, we were asked to do a thing for the National Museum of American Illustration in Newport. They were going to do something on 100 years of women's suffrage.
They're using the cover
And we were asking, yeah, they were going to use this, and they were going to use the image of the cradle that you just saw as well. And the point was that they decided what was equality. And we came up with the fact that the Mayflower Compact was signed by noblemen and servant alike. And it created an equality of classes, which again is a unique American brand. There was no caste system. There was also equality in race, in that here were the Pilgrims making a pact with the native Indian. We'll take care of our stuff, you take care of your stuff, we'll take care of each other. gender equality was not an issue at that point, and there's really very little that could support it at that time on either the Pilgrim side or on the from the native side.
Here's an interesting question. Did native people pass diseases to pilgrims? We know diseases were passed to the native tribes. I always wondered.
Good question.
I honestly, I don't know. I don't know that one.
I don't know. I don't know that if native people passed it to the English settlers. I know that there have been diseases passed to European travelers, obviously going to Africa, going to India. Those are the most going to the Caribbean. But I don't know if North American natives passed diseases to European settlers. I don't think that, at least not in 1620. I don't think that it never happened, but it was.
There's no record in any of
Yeah.
books or any of those other scholarly books that I've seen. Yeah.
What you obviously had, you mentioned about dealing with Eastham, with Provincetown. What were some of the unique pitfalls and conundrums you ran into in assisting those towns with what it was that they wanted to do? What were some of the pitfalls you ran into?
Jim Russo from the East Ham Committee could probably answer that one. But you know what? Let me answer that question a little bit more obliquely. There's 15 towns on Cape Cod. In 1644, a dozen folks left from the Plymouth Plantation and went right back to where they had their first encounter, which was now currently the town of Eastham. They purchased it in the typical way that colonists were purchasing land from the Indians at the time. There was a treaty and so forth, and is it really worth 3 axe handles and a copper drum? That's relative, I guess. But the point is, in 1644, they founded the town of Nauset, which really was the whole arm of the Cape, which is, if you look at the picture, the reason that's a different color and darker is that was basically the province of the Nauset tribe. So when they bought Eastham, that's what they bought. In the back of the book, as Karen referred to already, there's a montage for each of the 15 towns, and it recounts their history. And there's a short narrative, and basically all those towns split off of Nauset. And so you have Truro, you head up to Provincetown, you head down to Harwich, and Harwich begets Yarmouth. I can't remember exactly. It's like reading Genesis. But they all fall out of each other. The only towns that weren't founded through the Wampanoags was Sandwich and Bourne, which were founded out of the Mass Bay colony. So there it is, 1644. They come and they purchase the land of Nauset. 10 years later, the General Court of Massachusetts, which by then is taken over by Mass Bay Colony, changes the name, a beautiful name of Nauset, and calls it Eastham. Well, Ham means city, as you know. Hamlet is a smaller town and so forth. And so Eastham was simply a suburb of London. It had no real meaning whatsoever. But that was part of the corruption, I think, that happened, that the Pilgrims wouldn't have instituted with the native tribe. There was much more respect there for those 50 years of peace and mutuality.
One of the other things that I'm proud of in the book is that we've reproduced all those bicentennial images in color. In the first book that came out in 1976, Cape Cod 200, they were all in black and white because it was just prohibitive cost-wise to printed color. So we were able to add that to the book, and it's a nice feature to have.
I was glad you got, I mean, it's not a 1620-21 thing, but I was glad that you brought up, not glad, that you brought up about King Philip's War, because it really is remarkable that there was an era of peace and understanding, and maybe some unease, but a lack of violence for 50 years. And I think that's one of the great legacies of that 1620 to 1675 period, is that they yes, the European population was growing, but they stayed respectful until the second
It's
generation.
almost an inevitable joining of two cultures.
Yeah, and so I was, you know, it's an unfortunate part, and for people that are not familiar with it, King Philip's War actually was proportionately the bloodiest conflict in American history. You know, obviously there were far less people, but it destroyed the native population in the Northeast. It just was
90%, I think.
Yeah, so it was you know,
Pandemic has done a lot of that too. But Mark, to the point of, we talked about that one page about the inevitable encounter. It was really kind of interesting that we had such success, 50 years of success in that mutuality between 1620 and 1675. But the next encounter, if you will, was probably with the Plains Indians as we continued the westward expansion. And that was not the same type of a thing. It wasn't the survival of two cultures, it was the eradication of one culture. Now, we here in the Cape still celebrate the fact that we have Wampanoag among us, and Mashpee continues to be one of the strongest concentrations of the Wampanoag line. Karen mentioned her resource. If you look at the references that we have there, we also have Chief Flying Cloud of the Wampanoag tribe today, 92 years old, Chief Flying Eagle. Yeah. Liked the book. And his comment was, finally, somebody is looking at this period of time with a positive eye.
Yeah, he found the fairness.
Yeah, because we really did owe a great debt of gratitude. And they similarly, we kept them from being massacred by the Narragansett on the other side of the bay. So the first encounter, we think, was the first 50 years, and it was a very successful relationship.
Got a question here. When I visit schools with my educational Pilgrim Museum boxes, I find that the fifth graders have an interest in the children of the Pilgrims and the children of the Native Indians. Have you thought about writing and illustrating a book about the children?
I think this question may be coming from Houston, Texas. I had a conversation with Sandra. We saw some work that they were doing with school children down there, and I found the image of the 1621 painting in one of the boxes that they had the presentation in. So I recognized the image, and I wrote to her and got a very nice response back from her. So thank you, Sandra, for being on the call tonight. We'd love to do some work with you for future presentations that you have.
Yeah, Karen has come right to me and said, you know, what do you think about a kid's book? So yes, Sandra, you know,
yeah.
I
well,
think,
you know, the women and the children, I think, have been way overlooked. And as we know, the women were responsible for the first Thanksgiving feast. They tended to the sick. They went out into the fields, and there's always been a good woman behind a good man, I guess. But
there you go.
But I think the children, you know, many were orphans, and there's another story to be told there. So yes to that question, and the wheels are already working. That's why I have a great partner. Whatever I throw at him, he throws back at me.
All right, Kevin, this is from our friend Rocco. The peace treaty lasted 50 years. What caused King Philip's War? And I think, as we know, this is about second generations. This is Metacom and Josiah Winslow.
Well,
yeah, it really was. It was built into the walls and fences, I think. You know, it was suddenly...
It was the taking of their land.
Taking of the land. And suddenly they were running out of places to hunt the deer or do anything else. So I think, Rocco, it was a matter of not just the Pilgrims expansion, because as I say, they kind of stayed to the Cape initially. They went up to Marshfield and so forth. But I think it was suddenly realizing they were out of land. There's nothing left to give. And they resented that. This is a rare, people have a lot of trouble finding King Philip's death site, who was actually killed by an Indian named Alderman, right in the middle of the woods. Well, we found his death site, and there it is. This was his seat. That's where he preached. That's where he gathered all of his Indians and the natives from. Oh, that's a nice sign of the Mashpee, the land of the Wampanoag. And we think instead of saying incorporated 1870, we should simply say lands of the Wampanoag since forever.
Yep.
You know, and we do in the textbook, we do talk, in the textbook, in our book, we do talk about King Philip's War, ending 50 years of peace. And that's pretty much what happened right there. Is they were trying to burn from the outside in. And it made perfectly, you know, drive them into the water. It's been a principle of war forever. And that seems to be the motivation behind King Philip's War. Drive them back into the water, make them go back to England, give us back the land.
Well, I want to thank you too for doing this tonight. I think this is a good prelude to Thanksgiving coming up in a couple of weeks. Yes, even amidst a year with a pandemic, we still have a lot to be thankful for. And I'm grateful to you guys for doing this. Good luck with the book, and continued success. Karen, thank you. Kevin, thank you. And everybody who's enjoyed us, thank you very much.
We all thank you as well. That was very nice of you to come on, and we hope that was helpful to your understanding of the story.
Yeah. Thank you to all the attendees. To hear from you.
Very.
Holler, give us a shout out and an email. We'll respond.
And all you Mayflower descendants, keep it up.
Okay.
My wife is smiling. Yes. Carry the torch.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Stay safe.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
everybody.
much.
Bye-bye.